Here at home, the assassination of South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani 30 years ago, that's in 1993, nearly tipped this country into war. It was a failed attempt by right-wing elements to derail the transition from apartheid to democratic rule. Political analyst, fellow journalist and author Justice Malala joins us now to chat about his recently released book about the week after the killing of Hani. I'm holding it in my hands. The Plot to Save South Africa, Chris Hani's Murder, and the Week Nelson Mandela Averted Civil War by Justice Malala. This is the book I'm going to be talking to him about. Justice, welcome to today and thank you very much for coming in.
It's such a pleasure to be here, brother, and thank you for having me.
You know, reading this book took me back.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just starting your career, as you said, in journalism, at the Saturday Star, when on that day, particularly, it was Easter Saturday, let us remember, and you were thrust, you know, as a young journalist who's just beginning, to cover one of the biggest news stories, one of the most horrific assassinations we've seen in our country since democracy. Just take us back there. How did you feel at the time? I don't want you to reveal too much because I want people to buy your book.
No, this was, I think a lot of us look back at the early 1990s. Nelson Mandela comes out of jail, Ahmed Kathrada, Walter Sisulu, other leaders. 1990 is the opening up of South Africa. But in fact, after that first burst of energy, the negotiation process was taking long. People were being killed. On average, 4,000 people died in political violence in 1990, 91, 92, 93, and up to 1994. So on the weekend of 10 April itself, I was a young kid. I just arrived as at the Star, you know, all starry-eyed, wanting to do great things. And Chris Hani is murdered by a right-wing extremist, Janus Valush, in concert with a right-wing politician, and allegedly other people helped them along. So going back to that day, the attempt or the intention was that there would be massive rioting and protests at the anger of Chris Hani. Remember, Chris Hani was the most popular leader in South Africa after Nelson Mandela himself. So when it happened, chaos erupted all over South Africa. And this is what the killers wanted. They wanted chaos and they wanted the army to step in.
And they didn't get it. And part of the book, I mean, one of the main points you're making in the book is that it was due to bold leadership?
It was bold leadership on the part of Nelson Mandela, people around him, some leadership from FW de Klerk himself, people who said, we will frustrate what these right-wingers want to do. And the key thing was Nelson Mandela saying, we will protest and we will mourn and grieve for our lost son, but we will do it in a disciplined manner, and we will frustrate those who are trying to say this is black and white. This is they basically wanted to stop us being where we are today in this democratic, non-racial South Africa.
And I think Nelson Mandela reminded the nation at the time, and it's in your book, who reported the assassination to the police was a white woman.
Yes, he made it a point. Remember, the murder happens. South Africa goes into this racial spiral where it's the whites have killed our beloved son. So Nelson Mandela, 3 days after the murder, goes on television. A lot of reporting and remembrances say Mandela went on television on the night of the murder. Actually, it was three days before. And it's an interesting thing to think about what happened in the 3 days after. But he goes on television and says, a white man full of hate came to our country and murdered our beloved son. An African woman saw the killer, memorized the license plate, and called the police. Janus Valush was arrested within 35-40 minutes of murdering Chris Hani, and it was because of her. And by doing that, Mandela basically said, they're trying to destroy what we are building. It's not about black and white. And that was a major turning point in that story.
If there's one thing you want a reader to take out of this book, what would it be in your own words? I mean, you are writing it as the country's just marked the 30th anniversary of the assassination.
I think two things. The first one is that leadership exists, good leadership exists, and leadership at any point of crisis. Right now, you and I are talking about, you were interviewing the minister about cholera and so forth, load shedding and so forth. This is a point in our history when we need the kind of leadership Nelson Mandela showed. So leadership is the first thing I'd like people to take out of it. The second one is that times of crisis, this is not new. What we're going through as South Africans, it seems like we're at the very bottom. But in 1993, on that day, you and I were working, Pradan, it looked like there's going to be civil war in South Africa.
Yeah, I actually thought we were going back to war.
Absolutely. And Nelson Mandela says the same thing. F.W. de Klerk says the same thing. Everyone said that and said, this is the match that's going to light the fire. But we didn't. So even with times as hard as we're going through now, I just want to remind people that we've been down and we need leadership and resoluteness of South Africans to get back up.
You wrote this book so well. You did a lot of research, and in your acknowledgements, you talk about some of the sources, but it is really written like a thriller. I couldn't put it down because it just keeps on moving, and it's not written in the bombastic way. It's just telling a story, good storytelling here. I'm hoping people will get a copy and read. But before you go, you mentioned cholera now. You come from Tshwane.
Yes, I come from Hammanskraal.
How do you feel about when you read about this outbreak of cholera in your neighborhood where you grew up?
I'm the water that is being given to the people who are affected at the moment comes from the village where I grew up without electricity, without any running water. We used to buy water from other people who had sunk boreholes. And this, for me, is the tragedy of what we're going through. Nelson Mandela administration came in, electricity, water, and so forth. And here we are 29 years into our democracy, and we're going through this. It's an indictment on our government, on the various administrations, that a disease that has been eradicated in most parts of the world, and we are facing it in South Africa. It shouldn't be this way. This is where we need leadership to take us out of this.
Justice Malala, thank you very much, author, fellow journalist, and also political analyst. Justice Malala talking to me about his recently published book. I'm having it in my hand here, The Plot to Save South Africa, Chris Hani's Murder, and the Week Nelson Mandela Averted Civil War. Do yourself a favor, get a copy. Indeed, it reads like a thriller, but it takes you back to a very crucial moment in our history. We were on the brink of civil war. Bold leadership pulled us back. We need bold leadership today to fix the mess we are finding ourselves in across many sectors of our lives as South Africa.